Welcome to our podcast, Peace Matters. Peace Matters is an IIP podcast which deals with geopolitics and international relations. In the episode number 26 today, we are going to discuss Poland rising, peace, democracy and stability and leadership in Europe. And my guests are Wojciech Przybylski and Maciej Kisilowski. Wojciech is a political analyst based in Warsaw. He is president of the Res Publica Foundation and he is editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight. Maciej is a Polish academic and he is an associate professor of law and strategy at the Central European University. My name is Stephanie Fenkart and I hope you do enjoy this discussion. Wojciech, maybe to kick off the discussion, today we're talking about Poland, but not only Poland, obviously also what is Polish role today in geopolitical, I would say, different environment. We are now entering the third year already of the war against Ukraine. Maybe you can just, to kick off the discussion, give us a little bit of glance on the Polish, I would say, approach towards Ukraine. Like what is very important for Poland? Like how is Poland approaching this new geopolitical era?
Yeah. Poland's first and top priority is that for Ukraine to survive, to ideally thrive, but survive and remain institutionally viable country, not a failed state. This is priority number one. Support any support that can be mustered for Ukraine from the West is an objective set by the Polish government in rallying more support, not as long as we can, but actually to achieve the objective of Ukraine standing on its feet and being able to stop the aggressor, so not to have Russian troops advancing as very recently. And thirdly, it is about Ukraine in the European Union, an enlarged European Union. But here it gets more interesting and difficult because Poland actually wants Ukraine to meet the enlargement criteria. It's for the purpose of having long-term good relations that are balanced out within Europe by the regulatory framework that keeps different competition in check and enables peaceful coexistence. So I would say these are the three main objectives and perspectives that Poland currently is trying to pursue.
Maybe a quick follow-up question. We just had elections in the United States, and we do know that the United States is a very important, I would say, partner for Ukraine, especially when it comes to the delivery of weaponry and financial support. We also know that Trump said during his campaign that if he's going to take office, he's going to end the war within 24 hours. How do you assess now this new situation with Trump in office? Do you think he's going to be able to deliver on Ukraine what he promised?
So far, the nominations that we have seen regarding Ukraine and the peace plan points that were laid out on the table suggest that, yes, this will be the objective. This will be a policy objective to have a ceasefire, probably in realistic terms, rather than a peace deal between the two countries. This war probably will not end in peace anytime soon, but a ceasefire is something more tangible. And for that purpose, we see the Republican majority in the administration willing to both offer pulling and pushing factors for both sides, for Ukraine and for Russia. And there are some difficult offers on the table put forward by the US administration, difficult for Poland as well, because talking to Russia, reopening dialogue with Russia, lifting some of the sanctions for Russia, this is a very hard pill to swallow. It's a very bitter and difficult pill for Poland and for many other in Central Eastern Europe. Probably, if we want to have a ceasefire, and that's definitely something we want, there won't be any cheap way about it, good to go around it. There will need to be a sort of a difficult proposal. But let's see and wait, because one thing is to declare and push for it, and the other thing is actually to see Russia doing their bid, and it takes two to tango. It's not just what the US wish, it's also what Russia sees as their objective.
Thank you, Maciej. Maybe of what you just have been hearing, How would you assess the situation? I mean, we do know that we speak a lot about Ukraine, that it's about survival, it's about sovereignty, it's about rules and values, which the European Union actually says it stands for. I mean, they're actually also codified in Article 2, as we do know. How would you assess the situation from a Polish perspective when it comes to Ukraine and the future of Ukraine, let's say maybe in the next year?
So I think an additional aspect, and maybe a fundamental aspect, is that we are effectively living in another Cold War, and not only in terms of geopolitical confrontation between increasingly two blocs, but also, as in the previous Cold War, this geopolitical confrontation is paralleled by an ideological confrontation, which has also an internal aspect. We often forget that during the first Cold War, you had a standoff with the Soviet bloc and with Marxism, but you also had a very strong, in some countries, almost dominant, Marxist left-wing domestic forces, yes? And we have a similar situation now with this new right-wing authoritarianism. In that way, Donald Trump is like an equivalent of Italian communist becoming the head of state. Unfortunately, US is not Italy. Yes, US is the leading force in the West. So the situation is absolutely unprecedented. And it is unprecedented even though Trump was before in office. That's also a Polish experience, that those new right-wing authoritarians, they govern different the first time they have a try in power, and then the second time. For example, Jarosław Kaczynski in Poland or Viktor Orban in Hungary, the first time they governed in Poland in mid-2000s, it was signaling that they are revolutionaries, but they didn't really went through their revolutionary agenda. When they came back, for example, Kaczynski in 2015, you know what happened, we all know what happened, a true constitutional revolution. So I think we should absolutely expect that the return of Donald Trump, for similar reasons, different kind of people, Wojciech mentioned appointments, more radical appointments, and just more experience in governing, Trump is going to impose on the US a constitutional revolution, which will have huge geopolitical consequences.
Maybe following up on that one, I mean, where does this leave the European Union? Because we do know that Trump, he has been threatening about at least pulling a little bit off of NATO, you know, the NATO goal, the 2%, which countries, NATO members, Austria is not one of them, but should deliver on defense. Like, where does this leave the European Union in the future? What do you think?
Well, a few points on that to also to bring the context to explain the position that also is a very Polish position in this light. Maciej said that they will have geopolitical consequences, this constitutional change possibly coming with Donald Trump, or more, rather likely. This is going to change how America is being perceived, and do's and don'ts, how they will be perceived. The role of a liberal empire will be put in question. However, America's voice and impact on the world affairs and Europe will be still huge. I mean, Poland is one of these countries. It's one of the most pro-American countries in the world. We might only compete probably with Kosovo. In terms of the public opinion about, you know, how embracing we are, whatever is American, for security reasons, but also for many cultural reasons. So this will have huge consequences. Now, on the Europe question and defense and the push, Europe has, regardless of Trump, lived through a very important period until after the Cold War #1 that Maciej described. And it was built on cheap US security, cheap Russian energy, and cheap Chinese labor. Now, the news of today is none of these things are cheap anymore. If we are still in need of US security, this will cost us. And this is what Poland is probably doing in advance already, saying we're buying American, not to appease America, but in order to show that we're putting aside this long-term ambition, which is a Polish ambition, to fund and to build European defense. but the time is nigh and time is now to actually buy things that work, and they come and they bring American security to the continent. So advocacy point from Poland is, and we can see a shift also happening in France, to be open and to be ready to buy what is needed for Europe's security and for Ukrainian success. And that means that there needs to be money on the table, and this is what Poland is also advocating, that countries, and specifically we're talking about Germany, need to get around with certain internal blockages in order to fund European security, because the distribution of this cost is uneven across the continent, and the benefits are universal. So that's what Poland is advocating, and it will be hard advocate of this, regardless who is in power in Poland. There might be different shades of this, different versions of this communication, and I think we are having one of the most pro-European versions with today's Donald Tusk leadership. But what Europe can do in this context, I think it's fundamental to answer itself as nations of Europe. The key question: how do you win this war? Because Europe is at war. How do you win this war and bring about peace? And how, in making this effort realistic, you still win elections? And that's not an easy answer, and this divergence of key strategies of European countries is one of the biggest challenges. And whether Poland can do much about it, I'm not sure, but you can look at least in what worked in Poland. And Poland, of course, is also in many ways unique, but you can take a lesson of spending on defense that Poland has increased to almost 5% GDP, can come in hand with an increase of spending for social benefits, and the two compose something that can be the construct of internal peace, internal for our countries, that enables to win elections, because you need to have a social offer, social peace offer inside the countries that are also committing to build up defense externally. And without that component, we will keep going from wall to wall in searching other strategies. And it's...
Yeah, but you asked Stephanie about Poland a couple of times. I think one thing that needs to be emphasized, and it's not often emphasized, I'm very surprised how it's not emphasized within Poland. Because of this geopolitical and ideological clash, and how both sides, both the liberal side and this ultra-conservative right-wing side, nationalist side, are winning and losing in various countries, Poland has become perhaps the strongest as a country as it has been for literally 300 or 400 years. It's absolutely remarkable, and even more remarkable that Polish elites are not talking about it every day, because Poland has always dreamt about being powerful, and now came the time when Polish Prime Minister was in the spring in the room with like 5 other heads of governments and states electing the leadership of Europe. I mean, this never happened in Polish history. Yes, there were many leaders elected for us or appointed for us, but we never participated in electing leaders of Europe. Yes, and the combination of the path that Tusk went through, going through 2 prime ministership and then going to Brussels to be the council chair. The things that the decisions, the bipartisan decisions that Wojciech mentioned, the defense spending, but also the story of us being able to, at least for now, deal with this right-wing conservative revolution and bring back liberal values. I think all of this puts Poland in a unique position. And as I say, once again, I will emphasize, it's almost an uncomfortable position for Polish elites, because we always love to whine about our provincial status. Suddenly we are not provincial, we are the center, we are the main players of Europe. and I don't think that the intellectual world in Poland is quite able to make sense of what we should do at this center. Yes, we are in the room, we are at the table. What should we do at the table? I think Donald Tusk is pretty clear about what he wants to do. But I think it would be also beneficial if the broader group of think tanks intellectuals openly say, we are now no longer the province, the new member of Europe. We are one of the key nodes of the liberal bloc.
I absolutely agree, and I do think, especially the perception about Poland shifted recently with the elections of Donald Tusk last year, as far as I remember, because before we were mentioning Poland together with Hungary, more discussing it in democratic backsliding, so there has been a huge shift. So maybe my question still, in relation to the European Union, do you think that Poland, because it's going to be heading the presidency of the Council next year, Poland, do you think that Poland is going to push for, besides enlargement, and I would like to speak about enlargement later, is it going to be pushing for a more, a deeper integrated European Union? Or do you think that it will also reflect on what is happening within specific member states, that it's going to be more nationalistic approaches towards the European Union, which obviously makes it difficult for the European Union to act in a, I would say, increasingly multipolar world?
So I'm quite confident that Tusk is now, I think, in his pragmatic period of his career. He understands that political projects are only as good as they don't, infuriate the public to the extent that you have a backlash and then you lose everything. So it's also visible in his domestic politics. So I think that he is going to push for integration in areas where it's obviously needed, like common defense or energy policy, but he's not going to be, dogmatic or doctrinaire on just like let's push. And in some aspects, he may even join kind of the Eurosceptic bloc or voices saying maybe Europe has overreached, and I think this is this can be a very constructive contribution to the European project, because we are facing this competitor. We need to retool from the world where liberalism was the only game in town to this new Cold War. Yes, and with the new Cold War, you need to be strategic, you need to be smart, and you can't be dogmatic. Yes, you can't fight every fight. You need to choose your fights, choose your battles, and I think Donald Tusk is very much, with all his experiences, good and bad. Surely the 2015 election, even though he wasn't the prime minister, he was already in Brussels, but it was a traumatic event for him, and I think his actions communicate this pragmatism, this choosing the battles, also keeping a pulse on the public opinion and what really creates backlash for no reason. Part of the story, as it's told in Poland, of the emergence of this nationalist government in 2015 was that some reforms, which were generally good but not essential, were pushed for dogmatic reasons, and they created a disproportionate backlash, which then brought the whole system. And surely, in the cost-benefit analysis, 8 years of authoritarian state is a pretty significant cost. Yes?
Just that I don't want to put icing on the cake. I actually wanted to point to some challenges, internal challenges that there are in Poland. Also pursuing this strategy that is the dominant strategy and hopefully will be confirmed with the presidential elections next year. The challenges, however, of the milieu of internal critics of Donald Tusk from his own base. Because in order to achieve a lot of this change, there is also, he's mastering a massive change, not just for Europe, leading the voice as a leading voice in Europe, but for the country. He's doing two things that are serious political risks. One, he's not fulfilling and not able to fulfill directly the hopes on which he was partly elected from the most liberal, left-leaning intellectuals, activists. And he's got a big challenge, communication-wise, to explain to them, while he's doing these things that are pragmatic, at the same time, they are not the same as PIS was doing. And that's a mixed bag of success or not. So we will see. This is one big challenge that concerns the migration pact, the strategy on migration that the government announced. That also comes with the embracing by the liberals the question of army, defense, and security. The security is not the language that the liberals and left has been tune in for a long time. So that's a big challenge. And the other challenge regarding the base in elections in Poland will be how the business will look at Donald Tusk. The business saw it, Tusk coming and even being elected, in the elections as an opportunity to change whatever was not working with PIS. But he went much further. And this strategy on migration actually is about changing business model in Poland. There is element of security on the border control. There is a communication strategy, which is about giving people a sense of control, not to follow the Brexit mistakes or the Tony Blair mistakes, essentially, that led, in longer term to Brexit. But he does that also not to have foreign workers coming to the businesses in Poland and being the dominant strategy of business who have been making money out of it, and those business circles are essentially core supporters of the center-right liberal government of his.
Yeah, so he very well may fail, but I still think, as of now, he's one of the. Well, first of all, he's the only one, arguably the only one who managed to root out the populists after 2 terms. Yes, Lula and Biden did it as well, but only after 1 term, and we know that there is an entrenchment of this, authoritarian system that we know in a most classic version from Viktor Orban. But the second thing is that he is trying. You can see there is a strategy here. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. As with all strategies, there are costs of pursuing a direction. But something that was for me missing sorely from Biden administration was there was no even an admission that we are in this ideological war. There was no admission that there is still this other side. It was this pretense that, after January 6th, they were discredited and they are gone. This was most visible with, this unforgivable, in my view, delay by Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, with prosecution of Trump. The prosecution of Trump started effectively in 2023. So no wonder it didn't conclude within a year. But why did it start in 2023? Because there was a sense that we need to turn the page. We need to pretend that this far-right authoritarian movement doesn't exist anymore, or it's in the past and no longer relevant. I think Tusk at least is acknowledging that we have this very strong enemy, like in the political enemy, and enemy of democracy, I would say. In the European election, the right-wing forces in Poland in June got 48%. Donald Tusk coalition got 52, and so on. But 48 is not far from getting back the power. So we need to start thinking generally in the liberal West back in the Cold War terms, when you also have a kind of a measure of professional respect of the strength of the other side. I'm not saying respecting their authoritarian ideas, no, that not, but at least acknowledging that the other side is strong. It's appealing to certain ambitions or maybe frustrations of the electorate. We see it also here in Austria with the recent election. And they need to be treated as a very serious competitor. And if you face a serious competitor, you better have, some idea how you're going to play the game to win. And I think Donald Tusk is gaining a lot of respect by admitting that it's a very competitive game with huge stakes for Poland and for Europe, and spelling out some vision how he wants to win this game.
I think that's very interesting that you're also reflecting a little bit on that you need at one point also prioritize and see and look at the things as they are, and it is not, everything is not going as smooth as we actually would like it to be going. Maybe if we can just still speak about the Polish presidency and that they are going to have maybe a focus on enlargement. You mentioned enlargement beforehand. What do you think, like what is behind it? Like because we do know that Poland especially is keen on enlarging towards the east, which is Ukraine and Moldova, but we do still have like another set of countries in the Western Balkans whom we promised more than 20 years ago that they're going to be part of the European Union. So how do you think is Poland going to balance these two different, I would say, realities which are playing out and which do have a geopolitical component as well, I would say?
Enlargement is a strategic objective for Polish foreign policy and for the government. For Moldova and for Ukraine, it's a decade-long, or more than a decade, but definitely in the last decade, there was a huge investment of the Polish state in state building, democracy assistance, also political capital invested, even in the recent Moldovan elections and referendum. The number of Polish bilateral visits, but also rallying other EU leaders to Moldova by Poland was something remarkable. I think as for the size also of the country, the significance of this comes from, again, priority on security, which is bipartisan, but has been best embraced by Donald Tusk when we're talking about rule-based and following the book of procedures and the chapters of enlargement process. That was not done very effectively by the competitors or the political enemies, as Maciej has said. And we can see also how Viktor Orban has been failing and also desperately trying to get the rogue actors, political actors, to move closer to enlargement, kind of bypassing these official regulations. In the presidency, upcoming presidency in the EU Council, the priority of enlargement as such in communication will not be as vocalized because Poland will see the opportunities that they are, and they may be, and in the programming, the calendar of the presidency, to address progress in countries that effectively on their side are showing some possibility to move forward. Montenegro is a high hope, and Poland acknowledges and looks much closer to the Balkans more recently. You can see this by investing in diplomacy, which is expanding in terms of personnel in Balkan countries. Not all of them, not at once, but definitely, for instance, in Serbia, there is an elevation of diplomatic personnel, increased number and the seniority of diplomacy sent there. This is for the purpose of really being in the places that matter, again, for the European enlargement and European neighborhood, because we still haven't figured out in all of Europe whether enlargement policy hasn't turned over the last 10 years into something of a neighborhood policy, just of a different name. But Poland wants to be active part of it, definitely betting on increased chances on getting more countries closer to the EU by following the books. The most difficult, I think, will be with Ukraine. It will not be during Polish presidency that the first report of the next multi-annual financial framework will be announced. It will be going to the Danish presidency. But the discussion about the budget ahead of the announcement by the Commission of the first draft of this budget, of the framework proposal, this will be quite heated, political, and we won't find anything that will say there is money in there for Ukraine. But the question is whether there will be money for enlargement of any of the countries, of the accession funds, of the funds that are provided to new member states. Because the next perspective, I mean, if there aren't, then the political promise of making enlargement happen by 2030, which was the previous Commission promise, a Charles Michel promise essentially, and then political declaration by many leaders in Europe, will not be fulfilled. So this is where Poland's role will be, about nitty-gritties and the budgets and the financial perspective. Definitely we have now a person who knows how important it is and is in charge of budget. Piotr Serafin is a commissioner for budget and fighting corruption and malpractice and fraud in the European Union countries related to the funding. With Ukraine, the challenge will be also, since there won't be budget for Ukraine in the multi-annual financial framework, the questions will be how do we find additional money to fund Ukraine, keep it on its EU progress, and also not heed to what Ukraine already said to Poland, to open all of the clusters, to enable Ukraine fast-track non-conditional admission to the EU, which Poland is not potent, but definitely the having the tension about the ambitions and the expectations from Ukraine and the Polish delivering progress that matters for Ukraine will be a very important area to look ahead in the next half a year during the presidency, with potential of conflict, also diplomatic conflict between the two countries, if this is mishandled. I hope it won't, and I think I keep fingers crossed for that it won't.
But maybe my role here today is to strike more somber, if not alarmist tones. I do think that, and since this interview will be online in a few months, nothing disappears from internet. It's important to make a prediction, which I hope really won't be true, but I think the Polish presidency will be overshadowed by just perhaps a desperate attempt to keep Ukraine afloat. I think we are not, given the nominations, which are pretty radical nominations of people, and Trump's personal admiration of Vladimir Putin, and also what we know about Vladimir Putin, that the way he reacts to people admiring him is he wants more. Yes, he's absolutely Darwinian power player. He does not, he cannot get flattered like Trump. He cannot, it doesn't matter for him if he feels good that somebody admires him. He perceives it as weakness and will exploit this to, in every possible way. So I think there will be just, after January 20, there will be just a desperate attempt to keep, at least part of Ukraine as a sovereign, Western-oriented country. I do think that commentators are not sufficiently precise about what's going to happen. Putin is going to see this as invitation to swallow the entire Ukraine. He has suffered tremendous losses, paid tremendous price, and he now wants his payday. And with Trump, he made, because how naive Trump is in perceiving that Putin can be, charmed into some compromise. So getting out of it, I think, will clearly require some compromises on Ukraine part. But there is, I just hope that Europe and Tusk in particular can navigate that situation to keep at least part of Ukraine going and not turning into Georgia. We see what's happening in Georgia. Yes.
Do you think that Poland does have, has the ability of this leadership function? Because if we look at the European Union, we do see that there is kind of a divide between the different member states. I mean, Poland, obviously, also for historical reasons, has a very strong stance on Russia and Ukraine, which is understandable. So are the Baltics. But if you look more to the West, like Spain or Portugal, they actually do fear nuclear escalation. And we do see that there has been also a shift in rhetoric coming from Putin, that he might even be able to maybe not to go in an all nuclear war, but we saw that the strategy has been shifting. Do you think that Poland has the ability to bridge the divides within the European Union when it comes on the Ukrainian issue?
I hope so, but this, all of this will depend on how Trump is going to play it. Yes, I mean, I don't think he's going to play it well, but how badly is he's going to play? How badly is he going to mishandle it? Yes, I mean, there are some adults in the room that, his nominees, like Secretary of State, is pretty reasonable. So there is a hope that they will also not want put in tanks in Kiev, but you don't know, and of course Europe will need to stay united and counterbalance, and I think a lot of the groundwork has been done behind the scenes over this year. I mean, there was a clear expectation and prediction. For example, in the European People's Party, that Trump is favored to win. I was actually even surprised that because a lot of commentators were much more rosy and hopeful, but I think there was a lot of understanding of it. Of course, the appointments in NATO partly reflected this prediction, as we know. So maybe all of those things will fall in place and allow us to get some satisfactory deal. But what do you think, Wojciech? I mean, are we going to have a horrible situation or a really horrible situation?
Well, whatever it is, we just need to live with that. There is an enormous carrier of the word crisis that we hear in all different mutations and permutations. But actually, we should get over with it and do our stuff the best we can. The world is in a flux, and it's just Europe. It's really a state of global affairs. Back, 20 years ago, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Brent Scowcroft described it as a global political awakening, where there is a sense of also societies across the world seeing the international scene and power game as something they can influence, and that also relates to them directly. And only because of that and because of the global upheaval, the change also in the competition with China specifically, which is actually more important for, not to say the Ukraine is not, or Russia's war on Ukraine and Europe is not. But the China factor here is the number one issue that probably Trump will get us also to address. We'll have to deal with the policies that he's proposing for the purpose of actually aligning in transatlantic relations to what U.S. leadership on China is, because that is the number one, from the U.S. perspective, number one security issue. If we look at the global peace and not our European peace, where Ukraine and the fight with Russia is an essential and very important, existential for Europe, but no less than the big challenge that China might be posing. And Europe has been, even under Biden administration, also realizing that, and there was a redefinition of our strategic competition. The global compass has been updated. The threat perception is changing. This is not yet enough, because I'll come back to this initial point I made. This needs to be confirmed by the public opinion. Again, this global political awakening also concerns elections and electoral votes in our countries, in Europe. And aligning public opinion in Europe with the strategic objectives and presenting a fair deal that the societies know what game we are playing. And this is, again, alluding to what Donald Tusk proposes as a strategy, that it is clear, somehow comprehensible. You may agree, disagree with it, but you know how to master this game, and you can communicate it, which is no less important, to the general public. That is something to at least try very hard, because unless it is done, we will not only have some countries pursuing this ambition of Europe as a power that builds democratic security and the hard power, but then many other countries will be living in a world of globalism. They will still believe it is possible. There are some societies. I mean, Andrej Babiš is going to be elected next year in Czech Republic, and his electoral slogan last time was, "I'm doing business, not politics." Actually, speaks very well to a number of constituencies in other countries in Europe. Some others choose isolationist policy. So Robert Fico caving in, he's the side of all these conflicts. He will not interfere. He will not be trouble, but keep away from my money. That's more or less the message we're hearing. And then there are nationalists who are very interestingly today in today's world. They're peaceniks. They're talking about making peace and whatnot. But essentially, their communication, their fundamental principle is that power might makes right. And might makes right builds up for the time being the external aggressor's position. But it also translates to what they're doing at home. Because Viktor Orban is at the same time talking about peace. He's one of the most aggressively, this is one of the countries that most robustly builds up its defense sector, inviting foreign companies, building their own military. Just check the investments he's making with different companies, not just Rheinmetall. And these are strategic for the ambitions that once he's able to transform into a more political strategy and power, let's not kid ourselves, he'll use it again to master this nationalist strategy, to win elections and also spell trouble on the European peace setup.
Mm-hmm. Maciej, maybe just very briefly also reflecting, since China was mentioned, and we do know that also the United States is trying to actually shift the focus away from Europe, away from the Middle East towards China, because this is going to be the big strategic, economic, whatever rival in the future. So maybe you can reflect on the European Union and China very briefly, and also since you also mentioned Hungary, how are we going to play out with Hungary? What can we expect from Poland?
Well, I mean, I think there is going to be the relations with China are not going to go into a smooth direction. Yes, there is, because this is the nature of this Cold War 2.0. Yes, I mean, China has now basically bankrolled the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they're going to stay closely connected. I mean, we need to imagine now, for example, what is going to happen with trade with Russia, yes? I mean, if Trump is going to impose a peace or some sort of conflict freezing, it's not going to be technically peace, but de facto can be a decades-long, hopefully will be a decades-long conflict freezing of, the Korean or Cypriot type, then we need to ask ourselves what is going to happen with trade with Russia, between Russia and Europe. If we keep no trade, then we will be cementing this China-Russia bloc in many ways. But if we open the trade, we open ourselves to the accusation that we additionally reward the aggressor who will keep territories per Trump's probably lousy deal that he's going to strike for Ukraine. So I think realistically China is going to be an adversary for Europe and displaying both sides despite the hopes of German auto manufacturing is just not going to work. Yes, it's just like there wasn't a robust trade across the previous Iron Curtain. It's not going to be with the new one. I mean, it's not going to be literally the same because the economic model is much more aligned with international trade, but there will be a lot of security threats and potentially a hot war over Taiwan, which is going to destroy any connection, and will any decoupling that we've seen so far will pale by comparison to what can happen if there is a conflict over Taiwan.
Thank you. That was very uplifting. Maybe since we're already reaching the end of the podcast, it's called Peace Matters. So maybe we can try to have like a positive outlook in the next 10 years. Like what would actually peace mean for the European Union, also from a Polish perspective. So
yes, we need to remember that in this conflict, the liberal side is still strong. We got used to being the only player in the room, and now we are depressed because there is this other nationalist side. But the liberals prevailed over a strong ideological competitor, Marxism. It took decades, but liberals won. And I think we should be aware of the strength of our political enemy, but we should also be hopeful, not hopeless, about the strength of liberal ideas. And it may take a long time, but I think the liberal ideas will prevail over nationalism, just like they prevailed over Marxism.
What will be your take on peace, the positive outlook, if you can find it?
Peace is going to cost us a lot, and peace costs a lot of money. And the good side of it is that we can afford it. But this requires setting up the priorities straight. Europe is not for doing supermarket shopping. It's set up as we know it as a way in which we probably will find a way to upkeep it in also some economic prosperity model in the long run. But currently we need to tell to ourselves that peace costs, and again, we can afford it.
Thank you so much to the two of you. I think it was very interesting. We tried to reflect on many, many issues in a very short period of time. I do think there is some hope still available for Europe, for peace, for Ukraine. But I think we can agree that it might be a difficult time which is in front of us, and peace does cost, I do agree. But there is also still liberal progressive ideas are also still, let's say, on the table. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was episode 26 on Poland. I hope you liked the discussion. If you did so, please make sure to follow us on social media.